You were born in 1997, the first child of the most famous man on the planet. You did not see crowds the way other children do. You saw them through fabric. Your father put a veil over your face before you left the house, a scarf, a mask, sometimes a thin cloth draped over your whole head, and walked you past the cameras like that. He said it was to protect you, to keep your face your own, so that no one could ever own it or sell it. So your first memory of the outside world is muffled, blurred, the sound of 100 strangers screaming a name that was also yours, and you behind cloth, not allowed to be seen. Other children learn that the world is a place that looks at you. You learn that the world is a place you hide your face from. You did not pick the mask. You did not pick the name under it. You were a small boy with the most watched surname alive, and the first thing it taught you was how to disappear in plain sight. Home was not a house. Home was a kingdom. Your father built a ranch with a Ferris wheel and a carousel and a steam train, with elephants and giraffes and a private zoo, and named it after the place where children never have to grow up. You woke to cartoons piped through the walls and a man who would drop everything to ride the rides with you. He was, you would say later, the most childlike person you ever knew. Not childish, childlike. To you, he was never the most famous entertainer alive. He was the dad who turned a whole valley into a playground because his own childhood had been taken from him, and he was determined that yours would not be. You did not know yet that the kingdom was also a target, that the same gates keeping the cameras out would one day be the thing the whole world argued about. You just knew that inside those gates, for a few years, you got to take the mask off. Inside the gates, you got to have a face. You were 5 years old when the world met your baby brother. It was a hotel in Berlin, a crowd of fans chanting up at the window, and your father, overwhelmed, wanting to show them the new baby, held your little brother out past the railing for a few seconds high above the street. The photograph went around the earth in a single day. Your father apologized. He said it was a terrible mistake, that he would never endanger his children. You knew that. You knew the man inside the gates, but it did not matter what you knew, because that was the day you learned the second rule of the name. It does not just point cameras at you, it freezes you. It takes 1 second of your father's life and plays it forever, and the version on the screen becomes the only version most people will ever believe. You were 5. Your brother was a headline before he could walk. There was a shadow over your father that you were too young to understand and too close to ever escape. The world had questions about him, serious ones. There were trials. There were headlines that used your own home as evidence. There were strangers, millions of them, who were certain they already knew exactly who your father was. You lived with a different man. You are not the judge of all of it. No child of anyone is. But you have said, as plainly as you can, that the father you knew was gentle, that he was devoted, that he protected you to the point of veils and masks. The hardest part of the name was never the fame. It was that the man tucking you in at night was also a man half the planet had already made up its mind about. And you had to grow up inside the gap between those two people. You learned not to comment. You learned it from a man who was never allowed to stop being commented on. You were 12 years old. It was June 2009. You were in the house. There was shouting and paramedics and your father on the floor and a kind of motion in the rooms that you had never seen before. He did not wake up. The most famous man in the world died of an overdose in a rented mansion, and you were a child in the hallway while it happened. By the next morning, his death was the single biggest story on earth. Strangers wept in the streets of cities he had never set foot in. The internet itself buckled under the weight of it. And you were 12. You had just lost your dad, and you had to do it while the entire planet performed its grief, louder than you were ever allowed to feel your own. There is no manual for that. The name had already taken your privacy, your face, your childhood. Now it took your father and turned the worst day of your life into content. A few weeks later, they put you on a stage, a memorial in an arena, broadcast to more than 1 billion people. You sat in the front row in a dark suit, 12 years old, between your brother and your little sister. And at the very end, your sister, 11 years old, stepped to the microphone in front of every camera in the world and tried to say one sentence about your father. She said he was the best father you could ever imagine, and then she broke and the family folded around her. It was the first time the world had ever heard any of you speak. Your whole lives, your father had kept your faces hidden, and in the end, it was his death that finally pulled the cloth away. In front of a billion people, on the worst day of your life, you were not a mystery anymore. You were the grieving children of a man the world would never agree about. After that, an old woman raised you. Your grandmother, his mother, became your guardian, in a house full of aunts and uncles and cousins who closed around the three of you like a wall. They tried to give you the one thing your father never could. Something ordinary. You went to a real school. You had to learn late the things most kids learn early. How to be looked at without a veil. How to talk to someone who had only ever known your father as a tabloid cover. Every classroom you walked into already had an opinion about your last name. You could not change that. So you did the only thing you could. You stayed quiet. You stayed polite. You let people be wrong about you, the way the whole world had been wrong about him. And you waited to be old enough to decide who you actually were. So you grew up and you did something quietly radical for a person with your name. You became normal on purpose. You went to university. You earned a degree in business. You started a charity, your own with your own name on it, to feed people and help your own city, because your father had taught you that the whole point of a platform is to give something back. You did not chase the stage. You did not try to be him. No one could. You took the most famous name in music and you used it carefully to build small, useful things that were actually yours. For your entire childhood, the name was a mask you had no choice but to wear. As an adult for the first time, you got to decide what to paint on it. You are the son of a man the world will argue about forever. You are also somehow a fairly ordinary adult, engaged, running a charity, trying to live a normal life on top of an extraordinary last name. You spent your childhood behind a veil. You lost your father at 12 on live television. You were raised by his mother, and then you grew up and chose, on purpose, to be the quietest famous person you could be. You love him the way you love a weather system, with awe, with a little grief, and with the private knowledge that the storm he lived inside was never really about you. You were just born in the middle of it. You are, by most measures, one of the most recognizable young men alive. You are also just a son who wanted his father to be allowed to be a father. These two facts have always been related. Next time, your little sister did not stay quiet. She took the same name, the same grief, the same billion-eyed stare, and she walked straight into it. The cameras, the stages, the magazine covers, the tattoos, the music, the breakdowns in public. Where you hid, she burned. She has your father's name and your father's pain and absolutely none of your silence. Subscribe. Because the little girl who said he was the best father you could imagine grew up to live the loudest, most haunted version of this name there is. And her story is nothing like yours.